anything, almost anything, and clients make me think it's literally everything that I can imagine that you can do, you can find a way to do it with blockchain. Now, sometimes it makes more sense than others to actually do it. But regardless, it's such a game-changing technology that it's fun to think of all the way we can kind of revolutionize things, reduce costs on things, and kind of move society forwards using blockchain.
That was Marc Boiron talking about blockchain technology. We're going to go into everything blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, you name it. It's crypto. We're talking about it. Well, maybe not all of that, but a lot of it. So Marc is a partner in the FinTech and Blockchain Practice Group of Fisher Broyles. He has his JD and MBA. He did a joint program. He is very smart and knows a lot about this technology. And I am excited to share this interview with you today because it really gets down to the nitty-gritty of what happens in the regulation of cryptocurrencies and blockchain and where they're headed in the future and what impact they will have on our country and society moving forward. So with that, stay tuned and remember, listen carefully, think critically, and conclude thoughtfully. I'm Luke Scorzel, and you are listening to Bills. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bills with Luke Scorzel. We're getting up around 60 episodes, which is pretty exciting to me. But today we're here with Marc Boiron, who is an attorney and partner at Fisher Broyles in the FinTech and Blockchain Group. Marc, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty exciting interview coming up. It's going to be part of a larger cryptocurrency and blockchain series. We have 2 other episodes, and then there are more in the archives of Bills with Luke Scorzel if you'd like to go look at those for everyone listening. But I kind of want to pick out one thing. Maybe it's a little nitpicky, but it was in your bio, and it says that you are near obsessed with blockchain technology. And I kind of have 2 questions on that. One is, why aren't you all the way obsessed? But the more serious one is just, what is it about blockchain technology that really has you gripped like that?
Yeah, that's an absolutely fair question. And I'm only near obsessed because being absolutely obsessed would be even weirder than being near obsessed. So I figured I'd stay away from that. In terms of what was it, it was 2015, I got kind of introduced to Bitcoin. And, like everybody, you're like, yeah, whatever. This is, if it was such a big thing, everyone would be interested in it already. It's not. And then once you start looking at the technology and diving deeper and deeper, and every time you have an unanswered question, you dive deeper and get 5 more unanswered questions until finally you start narrowing the number of unanswered questions that you get to. You start realizing just how much of a game changer the technology is just in so many areas of our lives. And that's really the coolest part. It's just one of those things that anything, almost anything, and clients make me think it's literally everything that I can imagine that you can do, you can find a way to do it with blockchain. Now, sometimes it makes more sense than others to actually do it. But regardless, it's such a game-changing technology that it's fun to think of all the way we can kind of revolutionize things, reduce costs on things, and kind of move society forwards using blockchain, which makes it fun.
And you obviously didn't graduate from law school in 2015. I guess your bio here says 2012. But how did you get into the field of blockchain, and what was kind of the leap that you made to really practice law in that field?
Yeah, so it was at the end of 2016, somebody told me, you should really be doing what you love. And they were saying this to a group of people. And I sat there initially the way I've always sat there when people said things like that. And I said, that's just BS. Just, work your ass off and you'll be fine. But then it kind of hit me for a second, just beginning 2017, I was kind of looking at my practice and what I was doing. And I was like, you know what? That actually makes a lot of sense. And blockchain is an area that, that I'm basically always said I'm willing to bet my practice on blockchain being something that is going to be important in the legal world and in many other things. And so I just decided I'd just go for it. And so kind of just jumped 2 feet in beginning of 2017. And by kind of second quarter 2017, pretty much my entire practice was just in the blockchain space. And since then, that's all I've done.
And that would have been a pretty busy time getting into that area, especially on the legal side, because you had all of these initial coin offerings popping up then. And this is kind of where I want to get into some of the more regulatory side of things. But you had all of these offerings, and a lot of them were scammy, and a lot of them were, not authentic. So what was it that was happening in 2017 that, I mean, you got in the practice and then all of this crazy stuff started happening? How did you respond to that, and what was really going on?
Yeah, so maybe just to take a step back is like the thought process in terms of initial coin offerings and what people were trying to achieve. I guess you could put it in three different buckets. One is here's an opportunity to scam people. Two is here's an opportunity to raise a ton of money. And then the third one is here's an opportunity to use a coin in a blockchain network that is going to end up being really useful and allow us to do something that we couldn't do ever before. And that third category is the one that I'd kind of put in the pure kind of blockchain category, where somebody really sees the use of this technology and says, I'm going to build something around it. I think the second one was so exciting, and it's really what caused everything to take off, because people viewed it as a new way of funding things. And it was new for a couple reasons. It was the first time where you could set up a website and basically say, send a cryptocurrency here, and we will then distribute a cryptocurrency to you, right after. And that was something that you really had never really had in financing, and people were raising tons of money with it, and it was super exciting. The second part about that made it so exciting was the way that you thought you would get a return on that money was not the way that you would typically think about it with an equity investment or debt investment. It was literally thinking, well, if I hold this thing and they're creating this amazing product or network, and if it gets a lot of use and I've got a limited supply of these coins that I'm holding, then these coins are going to increase in value. And part of that's going to be just through users using it. And that the correlation between kind of users using a network and the value of the coins was going to be pretty direct. And so it kind of gave an opportunity to everybody to participate in the upside of a successful business, whereas historically, it was just whoever could hold equity in the company could benefit from the upside. So I think that's really kind of caused it. It was a little bit of a philosophical point of view, but it was also just the opportunity to invest and make money in a new way.
This is interesting because it's kind of one of the key areas that I've had a question on. I mean, doing a lot of these interviews is just the concept of using a currency and then the concept of that same currency being an investment. So it's like you're saying the currency gains value by being used, and then that same gain in value then so that value increases. So it's kind of like this weird thing, because traditionally with a currency, you think it should have a pretty steady value and not go up. If I buy a $10 pizza, I think was one of the stories with one of the first people that used Bitcoin, was they bought like this pizza for like a couple Bitcoins, and then Bitcoin shot up to whatever worth it's at right now. So how do you kind of rectify that in your mind, where you have the using and then the investing for a lot of these cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I don't know that I would think of most of them as a currency. I think you now have coins that are what people refer to as stable coins. This concept of it's going to remain kind of pretty flat and stable in value that we can actually use as a currency. But I think most people in the industry wouldn't think of most cryptocurrencies as currencies. Take Bitcoin, for example. I think most people in the industry would not consider Bitcoin to be intended to be used as a currency. It may have initially been, but now it's intended to be a store of value, more like gold. And so really, what you're seeing, I guess, is let's just assume that some of them are used as a currency. First of all, you get the benefit of a currency that for the first time is essentially deflationary or stable instead of inflationary. And so you don't have all the value of your currency absolutely destroyed by more printing of that same currency, because after a certain max supply, you can't print anymore. And so there's that benefit there to something as a currency. But the difficulty is, how do you actually use a currency when it continues to increase in value? Everybody wants to view it, hold it as an investment. And I think that's where, that's why Bitcoin is more viewed as kind of a store of value. And there's also technical reasons why it's going to be viewed that way more. And that we really don't have a good solution for a currency besides stablecoins. The other thing is, most of these networks that we're creating, tokens or coins, however you want to word them, really, I don't think I would put most of them in the currency category, because they were used for more limited purposes. They were used to give a discount in the network. They were used to incentivize sharing. All things that in a way you could throw them in the currency category, but they had a lot more limited use that are more like credits than or the right to receive discounts than really anything else. But even a discount, that discount can get more valuable if more and more people want that discount. Because if you have if you have a shop that is charging, $10 for something, and you can get it for $9, you would prefer to get that $1 discount. And if that discount ends up being only 50 cents because it's gained more value, you'd still rather have the discount of 50 cents. You'd also still rather have the discount of 10 cents. And so really you end up having something that can gain value, but still continues to be useful.
Mm-hmm. So kind of, what I'm getting, I guess, listening to that is that there's this underlying technology that is blockchain that connects these different currencies or coins, maybe not currencies, with different use cases. So some might be investing, some might be spending. Does that sound like a fair assessment to you?
Yeah, the way I always say to think about cryptocurrencies is really to think of it as being literally anything somebody wants it to be, because you can code anything you want into that cryptocurrency. You can give it whatever rights you want. You can give it pretty much whatever limitations you want. And so there is no single way of thinking of it. It's really, what is its use case in this specific scenario?
Mm-hmm. So, and that gets back into kind of the regulatory side of things, is that there really was a lot of freedom with how these coins and ICOs could operate. So what was going on there that, especially on the regulatory side, that allowed these kind of scams to persist without really a whole lot of accountability to any governmental agencies?
Yeah, so there's a few parts of it. So first, we can kind of walk through it, but there's a lot of different. Let's let alone the side that this was completely international in a way that we've just never seen before. Half of the ICOs were coming out of China. There's just so much coordination that would be needed across jurisdictions to be able to really put a stop on much of this. But even leaving the international aspect out of it, I'm a U.S. attorney and it's what I practice in, is basically, you still have a lot of coordination needed, because this touched on, cryptocurrencies touch on securities laws, commodities laws, money transmitter laws, consumer laws. You could get into banking laws at certain points in time. There's a lot of different laws that it touches on. And so that coordination makes it really difficult for any regulator to really have kept up with things quickly. On top of that, the industry was moving so fast that in a very complex space, that for any regulator to really grasp what was going on was really difficult. On top of that, things were changing. The approach to how tokens were being sold through ICOs was changing all the time. It was monthly that, I'd have a client come to me and say, I want to do this. And I said, that's not how people are doing it now. We're doing it this way now. And so, it's changing that fast. You're able to sell, literally, if somebody wanted, they could whip up a website and start selling these tokens, the next day. Maybe put a white paper together, take a few more days to do that. Personally, I wasn't representing clients that did that, but you could. And so really, it probably took the SEC a good solid year where things were pretty robust in the ICO market before it did anything. And the SEC, I'm referring to the Securities and Exchange Commission, regulating securities in the US. And, it had its initial kind of guidance in the space had to do with an entity that is referred to as a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. And that alone just shows how complex this was. It was literally an entity that was essentially completely decentralized and not run by anybody, that was making investments in other coins and essentially being able to essentially pay out dividends. And it took the SEC a good 9 to 12 months to actually investigate the DAO and to come out with what's known as the DAO report. After that, the SEC started picking up pace a little bit in getting things sorted out. But it wasn't until really beginning of 2018 when the SEC did something that, from a regulatory perspective, was super smart. It basically started sending out subpoenas to all these companies that had used a certain type of legal instrument that was being used a lot of time. This thing referred to as a SAFT, a simple agreement for future tokens, that said, hey, pay me now and I will deliver tokens to you in the future. It was intended to deal with certain regulatory issues, including securities laws issues. And that put a huge damper on the space without the SEC needing to really do much else. It pretty much freaked everybody out. And so things really from there on actually started slowing down quite a bit. The SEC took a while to get into it, but you have to give them some credit that this was moving so fast. It was hard for them to do anything else. And once they did wrap their head around it somewhat, they put a good damper on this. And since then, they've kind of been moving pretty methodically through kind of bringing actions against different types of parties in the ICO space. And then you move on from securities laws, then you have commodities laws. And that's one issue where, commodities laws is a little different from securities laws because securities laws deal a lot with how can you issue these securities? How can you then trade these securities? And the scope of the securities laws is so broad. Commodities laws are when you're dealing with just pure commodities, they're a lot more narrow. And the CFTC, which is the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, really doesn't actually have the right to regulate commodities that are being sold in what's referred to as spot transactions. So transactions that are actually being done in that currency, in that commodity at that time, not future, some right to receive that commodity in the future, at which point the CFTC does regulate it. And so the CFTC essentially came out and said, we're going to regulate this if it's fraud, because we can do that in spot transactions only if it's fraud. If it is a kind of leveraged product, or if it's a futures product, that's pretty much what the CFTC can regulate. And so it really, most of the time, transactions on exchanges and most of these instruments and ICOs were all spot transactions. The CFTC just didn't even have jurisdiction to do anything except for fraud. The problem is when your jurisdiction is so limited to just fraud, it's really hard to have a pulse on what's going on in the industry and actually spot that fraud when you're not really paying attention to every transaction because you don't have the bandwidth to do it and it's moving so fast. So kind of the CFTC somewhat gets a pass in that respect. And then you've got FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which regulates essentially money services businesses and money transmitters. So somebody who is going to take a currency and essentially transfer it to another place or create a new currency, things of that nature. And the CFTC very actually early on, I think it was maybe 2013, actually was giving guidance on cryptocurrencies. And it gave guidance for quite a while, quite a bit, but it wasn't frankly the best guidance. And once we got to ICOs, FinCEN just remained quiet on them. There was one letter from a low-level person at FinCEN that went to somebody at the House, I think, that essentially said, we may see, we think most of these ICOs, unless they're dealing their securities, are within our jurisdiction, but didn't really say much. And it really wasn't until 2 months ago or so that FinCEN came out with much more complete guidance on cryptocurrencies as a whole, but still very vague guidance on ICOs. And I think the reason for that is when you think of how ICOs can be carried out, they can be carried out in so many different ways, in so many ways where companies are essentially not even touching or doing anything to create that cryptocurrency other than a smart contract that could automatically then distribute coins. And whether there's really somebody there for FinCEN to regulate is a really hard thing to do because FinCEN essentially regulates intermediaries. So people that are kind of in the middle of transactions dealing in currencies, and a lot of, given the ability with blockchain technology to essentially remove intermediaries, there's a lot of opportunities to never fall within FinCEN's jurisdiction once you take advantage of the technologies. So that's kind of the most relevant. You've also got consumer protection laws, but because most of these cryptocurrencies end up falling within commodities laws or money transmitter laws or securities laws, the consumer protection angle really hasn't been a very relevant one. Although there's been some documents put out essentially saying, "Hey, just pay attention to the fact that you could be defrauded."
Yeah, important.
Sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's the complete answer.
No, I appreciate that you went in depth. What it seems like to me is that it's really disruptive towards, I mean, like anywhere that you can even think of, if it's crossing across to all of those different agencies and fields of regulation. Are those just single, like one cryptocurrency might fall under the SEC's regulation, and then another might fall under like the CFTC or the FinCEN? Like, do they kind of categorize in there, or is it just that like one could fall under all three, like needing to be regulated?
Yeah. So in most instances, one should fall under one or the other. And in the past, that's what you've always had. The problem goes back to when you create a cryptocurrency, it goes back to what I said. It can be anything. And so you could create a cryptocurrency that says, hey, I'm going to give you this return on your investment, but you're going to use this cryptocurrency to pay for everything. And so, technically, it should be one or the other. And why is that? Well, first of all, if you've got a currency, it is specifically excluded from the definition of a security. And so you really shouldn't have something that is a currency that is also a security. The problem is that the SEC and FinCEN are not necessarily going to, and the regulations that they enforce don't necessarily think of currency in the same way. Their definitions are not necessarily the same. So while they're not intended to overlap, we've now created products that cause them to overlap. And so, yes, you can end up having something that is, both a commodity and a security, although that's more rare, but more common in this space. You see something that's a security and a currency. But that is just because of the nature of the technology, but it's not intended in the regulations, and it's something that should probably be fixed.
And one other question that I have is just with the context of what cryptocurrencies and all of this came about from was really this almost desire to be apart from government and apart from like the traditional regulations and foundations almost of society, and kind of have this like anonymized experience. With Bitcoin, that was really a big selling point, was that you could have these transactions anonymously, and it was even used for kind of dark means on the dark web and on the Silk Road. But how, given that context, how is the space reacting to these attempts to regulate more? Is there like an acceptance that's kind of necessary and needed, or is there pushback? What's your take on it?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I just want to say, that just to make totally clear, which is a lot of people think of Bitcoin as being anonymous. And this is just an important point. And it's really not. It's pseudo-anonymous. And the reason that's so important is because it's actually one of the easiest ways to track criminals is through Bitcoin, because you literally have a ledger that walks that's going to walk people through every single transaction, that you can literally see where every single Bitcoin ever gets sent, and where it has been sent historically. And so, and eventually what happens is anyone who gets a hold of Bitcoin needs to, for the time being at least, eventually needs to get some kind of fiat currency. And because FinCEN regulates, and most jurisdictions regulate exchanges and fiat on-ramps and off-ramps, most of the time, almost any time you want to get money, you are going to need to convert that Bitcoin into fiat, and you're going to have to give information to that exchange or other kind of on-ramp or off-ramp. And so it ends up being, and there's companies that are known for this, Chainalysis, Elementus, they essentially, their job is to track these transactions for whoever their clients are. And so the government can end up just kind of walking through the blockchain and saying, okay, you exchange, tell me who it is that cashed this out, and I'm going to go, find them. So it's important because there's also anonymous cryptocurrencies like Monero, Zcash, where that really isn't possible. And it really truly is anonymous. And the reason criminals don't use it is simply the liquidity is not there relative to Bitcoin. So you buy, if you ask for somebody for $2 million of Monero, it's going to take you a long time to be able to convert that into fiat, whereas you can convert it in minutes and seconds from Bitcoin to fiat. So anyway, that's a side point, but I think a very important point in general about the cryptocurrencies. And so now to answer the question in terms of regulations and making it how people feel about it, there's definitely a huge split in the industry. I'd say probably 75, 80% feel like, what are the regulators doing? This is something that is not within their jurisdiction at all. They shouldn't be touching it. And, they're very anti-government. Some of them aren't necessarily anti-government. What they've just been hearing for a long time is, these regulators are doing a terrible job of regulating the space. They just shouldn't touch it. And they believe that. Then you've got the other 20% that are saying, these are some of the most regulated products that exist, and they should be some of the most regulated products that exist, because you have the opportunity to scam people so easily. And then within all that, and it really gets to the first point, is the whole concept of privacy and what kind of rights you should have to privacy. And that ends up really in kind of the first group, the 80%. I'd say about 50% of those people are really people who just believe in their privacy and that the government shouldn't have a right to know what they're dealing in, what they're doing. So that's kind of, in my opinion, the landscape on how it's split between how people feel in the space about regulators.
And I mean, this kind of almost perfectly slides into one of the next topics that I have is on Facebook. And it kind of sounds weird that, oh, that's perfect. But Facebook has announced that they're going to have their own digital cryptocurrency called Libra, and it will be in partnership with PayPal, Uber, Spotify, and a few dozen other companies, and is expected to be released next year. The reason I say it relates is, Facebook is currently under investigation in the United States because it has irresponsible privacy practices. And a lot of people are kind of concerned, like, okay, I already give Facebook all of the data on what I do socially, who I'm friends with, where I'm going, and all of this stuff. And now Facebook also seems to want to have access to where I spend. Is that a legitimate fear? And what are your initial thoughts on how Libra will affect privacy in the crypto space?
Yeah, so I think it's a fear that's a little bit comes out of a misunderstanding of how Libra is going to work. So just to kind of give an overview, there's really three parts of this. Four. There's the Libra Association, and that is a group that is currently being led by Facebook, but a group of, I think it's 28 members right now. It's a nonprofit in Switzerland with the goal of getting up to 100 members, where each member has one vote, and Facebook is only one of 100. And Facebook said that by the end of 2019, it's going to kind of step away from that leadership role and just be one of those 100. And so when you look at the Libra Association itself, Facebook's not going to have some outsized influence there whatsoever. It's going to be one of 100, and it's not going to have a choice but to be one of 100. It's also really important to kind of keep an eye at who those other members are going to be. These are not companies that have any interest in furthering Facebook's future and in supporting Facebook's practices. I mean, MasterCard and Visa have no interest in being associated with all the issues that Facebook has from a privacy perspective, potentially antitrust perspective, things like that. So then once you get past the Libra Association, you say, well, what's Libra Association doing? And it's creating this Libra network. A lot of that's probably been worked on already by Facebook folks. Facebook's taking the lead on it. They've got a lot of technological prowess that I'm sure they're going to put into it. But that Libra network is really operated by those 100 kind of founding members of the Libra Association, not Facebook. Technically, depending on how that network ends up being built, there's going to be more or less that members operating nodes from the Libra network, what information they can see or not see. But presumably it's going to be encrypted, and you're really not going to be able to see much data. But Facebook again doesn't control that network. Within that network, then what's going to be created is this Libra currency. Again, Libra currency all operated by the Libra Association, not by Facebook. And so, again, would I rather, especially somebody in this space who really believes in it, would I rather see Bitcoin that is permissionless and totally censorship resistant, not controlled by even 100 people? Yes. But do I have concerns over a cryptocurrency that is controlled by 100 large companies in the same way I would if it was truly controlled by Facebook? Not even close. And so, when I take a look at that, I'm like, okay, so they're going to create a currency that is going to be backed by fiat currencies and government securities. Okay, so it's going to create a very necessary currency these days as an alternative to the US dollar that people outside of the US, especially in developing countries, could really use and trust. This is probably a good thing. And then that gets us to the fourth part, which is all the applications that can now be built on the Libra network to use the Libra currency. Now, why Facebook is getting so much flack, and I think they probably should have thought of this, is that the only thing that's been presented as the only application on top of it right now is Calibra, which is Facebook's application. And the way I always say to think about it is think of it as instead of being Venmo on top of the traditional banking system using US dollars, it's Calibra on the Libra network using the Libra currency. And so, essentially, but anybody can come build a Calibra competitor. Now, Facebook has an advantage in that it's going to build it into its net. It's not an advantage that comes from it creating this. It's just an advantage from its current ecosystem because it can build the use of the Libra currency in Messenger and Instagram and WhatsApp. That will make it very easy for people to use it. Now, Calibra is going to be totally regulated. It's going to be a money services business that's already registered with FinCEN. It's going to need to be registered as a money transmitter in states where they are licensed, in states where licensing for virtual currencies is required. But I think there should be, and there probably will be concerns around Calibra because it is going to need to collect more information than Facebook currently has. Just to be able to be compliant with regulations. And then, yes, 100%, it's going to know where transactions are going, within from kind of Calibra users. So my point is only in saying, kind of breaking it down that way is, yes, there should be concerns around Facebook, but not around the Libra network or the Libra currency. It's around Calibra, which is built on top of it. And the Libra network and Libra currency can be very useful without anyone ever using Calibra. There's going to be other applications built on it, and they can use that instead. So anyways, that's the biggest benefit that I see for Facebook from this is Calibra network and Calibra currency are a better infrastructure and currency than the current banking system and US dollar. And for that reason, it allows them to build Calibra as a better product than Venmo. And so that's really where I see Facebook having an advantage. But again, Venmo can come and build on this network if they want. They're not likely to, but they could.
That's a pretty awesome claim to make, or huge claim that it will be better than the US dollar. But is it kind of this in between a cryptocurrency and a traditional fiat currency? Because you have, it's backed by fiat currencies and real assets and government securities. So it's not like a total cryptocurrency where it's being operated by this decentralized system like Bitcoin or others. So where does this fit into the currency spectrum?
Yeah, I think the hybrid is a good way of putting it. I'd still call it a cryptocurrency because it has the cryptographic natures of a currency. I just wouldn't call it censorship resistant or permissionless or decentralized, but it's still a cryptocurrency. And importantly, it plans on moving towards being permissionless, which means anyone can operate a node, and it presumably would be decentralized in that context. It says within 5 years. I don't think it's going to happen that fast, but that's the goal. And so when you have that in mind, you're like, okay, well, this actually does look like a cryptocurrency, and they want to move it more and more towards the censorship-resistant benefits that many cryptocurrency have. The reason I say that it's better than the U.S. dollar, it's because it's going to allow me to do the things that I currently do with Bitcoin that I can't do with the US dollar, which is it is December 23 at 6 p.m. and I need to send somebody money in a decently large amount. And I do not feel like waiting until essentially January 2nd for it to arrive over there. And so I go to my Bitcoin wallet and I send them Bitcoin. And sadly, because Bitcoin's not a currency and not that great, it gets there an hour later, but it's better than getting there 8 days later. And so that's the kind of thing that is very hard to compete against. You also have the fact that for US people, I will say all day long that the Libra currency is not that useful. But for anyone, including in the EU, having an alternative to the US dollar that is trustworthy and in my opinion will become more trustworthy with time as it hopefully becomes more decentralized is absolutely huge. And it's going to have, in my opinion, a huge impact on the US dollar as well because, well, I actually won't go there because it's such a big claim. But it's a big. I think it's a big issue. And look, there's a reason why U.S. regulators, actually, it's not even the regulators, the politicians are so concerned over Libra. They're holding hearings on the 16th and I think 17th of July because they know that this could actually have an impact on the U.S. dollar because you now have, I will say the claim that I wasn't going to say, you will have potentially a true alternative to the U.S. dollar that could have the necessary float and volume to actually be a true alternative and stability that the euro and the yen could never give.
Now, just hopping in here for 1 second. Now, obviously, those hearings already happened, but stick around at the end of the show for a little recap of what went on in those hearings, what some of Facebook's arguments were, and what lawmakers said. Just a short little recap, but necessary for understanding the larger context that Marc is talking about. And with that, back to the interview.
The euro and the yen could never give.
So you say it's not really useful for United States citizens, but it is overseas, especially in Europe. I was really thinking, like for unbanked people around the world, that would probably be the primary audience of people who could use this. Although I assume that would be a fairly large group of people who could use it too. But why do you think it will be so much better for people in Europe than it will be for us in the United States?
Yeah, I should be clear. I didn't mean that it'll be better for people in Europe. Europe have a fine banking system, just as good as the U.S. Where you're going with it in terms of the unbanked, mostly developing countries for like remittance purposes and things. That's where Libra is really going to shine. My point was only that if you were to ask anyone other than the U.S., is it good to have the U.S. as the reserve currency for your country? What's the answer? The answer cannot be yes to that. And while the people using the euro have no reason to use anything other than the euro, what I would be very excited about if I'm in Europe is the possibility that with time, as we see trust in the Libra currency, and as more central banks potentially run nodes and start getting involved, that we could create a true currency globally that, ex-US, that gives us a true alternative to the US dollar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting looking at all these companies that are running this. You have like Visa and Lyft and eBay, Spotify. So it's like this huge, diverse group and making what could be an alternative. So is this like unique to Libra that you have a currency that's being invented not by a government, but by companies?
No, there's like a whole group of stable coins that exist. And they fall into many categories. You've got stable coins that are fiat-backed stable coins. So most of them are backed just by the US dollar. So a 1-to-1 ratio. Things like Tether, USDC, Paxos, things of that nature. And so there's quite a few of them. I mean, there's got to be, and there's got to be, I don't know, 50, probably 30 just fiat-backed ones. Then you've got another group of stable coins that are intended to replace currencies that are what I'd call collateralized stable coins. And they're not collateralized, like non-fiat collateralized stable coins. And so those are things that are backed maybe by gold, but usually other cryptocurrencies. And so based on that kind of basket of cryptocurrencies, or even one, you essentially use it, even though it's an unstable currency underlying it, you can create, stability in that cryptocurrency by removing or adding currency to it at any time, the cryptocurrency. And then you've got like a third group of stable coins that are trying to do the same that nobody's successfully done, is what's referred to as a pure algorithmic stable coin. So it's just math underlying the stable coin with the intention of keeping it at $1 or whatever else stable value they want to keep it at. So the answer is yes, there's a lot of different efforts, not just in fiat currencies, but in other collateralized and non-collateralized currencies as well.
And then would you use Libra?
I'm in the US. I don't need to use Libra. That being said, that's not even true. There's several instances where I would use Libra. First, if I need to, my family's, a little bit everywhere in the world, including Canada and Mexico, and from time to time, China. I owe my brother money for the last 2 weeks, and I haven't sent it to him. Why? Because we literally, it's like a pain figuring out the best way to send it to him. Now, basically what I'm going to end up doing, because it's literally the easiest thing, is telling him, hey, here's this, go open this wallet over here, and I'm going to send you Bitcoin. And because you should hold Bitcoin anyway, you're just going to hold on to it and you're not going to do anything else with it. But if I had Libra and it was an easy on-ramp, and then I can just go send that to someone in Canada for pretty much no fees whatsoever, I'm going to do that. And I would probably also use it whenever I want to trade cryptocurrencies. If I want to actually hold something that is stable in value, I'd probably hold Libra over other stable coins that I would currently hold for that purpose. And so, you've seen things like Binance this morning, one of the biggest cryptocurrency exchange, saying, hey, we're interested in having Libra on our exchange. That's huge for traders, for example. And so there's going to be, I think, a few reasons to hold Libra, but for everyday use, there's absolutely no reason I would use it.
And I guess the second part would be, would you use Calibra?
Would I use Calibra? The answer is I don't know. If there's no other alternative, then yes, I would use Calibra for the reasons I just described. If there is another alternative, I would probably choose the other alternative. And there will be other alternatives.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it sounds like from what you had said, that's really where all the privacy stuff comes into play is on Facebook's platform for using Libra. But
yeah,
and all very interesting stuff. I think it'll be interesting to see where all this ends up in a few years. And this is kind of like winding down to the end here. But one of the questions that I've always kind of had is, which you think will end up moving into the future, like blockchain or cryptocurrency, as the real like standout from this period in time? Like you have these cryptocurrencies that have kind of been all over the place, and then you have this hybrid currency, so we've deemed it, and then you just have the technology of blockchain, which I guess we could have had an entire other interview on. But do you see that one is going to prevail over the other, or they both have these great opportunities, and we'll look back at this period and say crypto and blockchain came out of this?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think crypto and blockchain came out of this. I mean, bottom line is crypto currencies wouldn't be possible, at least in their current form, and as far as I know, without blockchain technology. And so, blockchain is kind of the fundamental technology. I think there will be other use cases. People talk about what is the killer application of blockchain, and many people think it's money in the form of Bitcoin. I think that from a, let's call it like political or societal perspective, I think that's probably accurate. I think cryptocurrencies I think they're already having, but they'll continue to have on a bigger and bigger scale, massive implications in countries with unstable currencies and censored capital outflows and things of that nature. I think, having a cryptocurrency is just absolutely huge for them. And then, but that doesn't, that's really important and really changes lives. But, you can't ignore the impact that blockchain technology is going to have on securities. I mean, the way securities are traded nowadays, like just traditional securities, equity in public markets, is almost embarrassing how bloated it is with intermediaries that are unnecessary. Once you have blockchain technology, the costs that can be reduced through like enterprise type technologies is huge. A lot of people will say, well, that's not a true blockchain. Maybe, arguably, and maybe it doesn't have all the same benefits of censorship resistance, things of that nature, but it doesn't change the fact that it can save it actually is saving millions of dollars of costs, and makes coordination among entities a lot easier in the same way it's doing that for Libra. And so I think both of them are going to have a huge impact, but I think at a societal level, it's really cryptocurrencies because of the core impact that money has in our lives and on the ability to control lives. I think society is going to benefit the most from cryptocurrencies.
Mm-hmm. And I can't help myself. I'm too curious about this. But do you think fiat currencies will persist? Like if you look in 100 years and are fiat currencies anywhere in sight, or are we just on kind of these cryptocurrencies?
I think so. I did a JD MBA, and in my MBA program, we talked a lot about change and things of that nature internally. And I kind of viewed the world as just one entire huge organization with a lot of stakeholders, and the ability to actually create change has so much to do with timing, who happens to be where at the right time, and who takes what actions. And I think that there is a small likelihood that a completely permissionless, censorship-resistant cryptocurrency ends up being the winner. I think you are a lot more likely to see central banks embrace blockchain, move, and I'm talking 50 years from now, for the big developed nations, to blockchain-based currencies that will still allow them to probably print money in the way that they want, but will create a much more efficient and cost-effective system than we have today. For a Bitcoin type cryptocurrency, and it wouldn't be Bitcoin, to end up being it could be Bitcoin, I shouldn't say that, to end up being the kind of global reserve currency, will require so many different things to fall into place just at the right time for that to actually happen, which makes it very unlikely.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll have to check back in 100 years and see where we are. Thank you so much.
Put it on the schedule.
Yeah, I'll mark it down. But anyways, thank you so much for coming on, Marc. Do you have any final thoughts or any words for the audience?
No, just if you're not a believer in blockchain, I'd be very surprised. But if you're not a believer in cryptocurrencies, I wouldn't be surprised. But I'd say that you should probably really dig into it before creating too many beliefs. And even if you don't believe in it, hold a little bit of Bitcoin and you'll be thankful.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I certainly did. Marc is very interesting and knows a lot of amazing, interesting stuff about Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain that I don't, and probably you didn't either. As I promised in the interview, I'm going to go into a brief recap about the hearings that happened in July that Marc mentioned and what some of the arguments were from Facebook and from lawmakers. They were pretty similar to what I brought up in terms of privacy, that how can we trust Facebook, an organization who just has had breach after breach of privacy in their social media network, with now getting into the banking system and into people's finances. So that was one of the main concerns. Facebook had a representative there, David Marcus, who responded saying this.
Calibra is committed to protecting the privacy of its customers. The Calibra wallet will not share individual customer data with the Libra Association or even with Facebook, except for limited circumstances such as preventing fraud or criminal activity and complying with the law.
Now, take what you will with that. I don't know. As you heard Marc say in the interview, he would be maybe a little more sketch of using Calibra, which in fact, Calibra will be the only wallet that can be embedded in Facebook's apps. So they do kind of have a way to rope you into using their own wallet. if you want to use the currency. David Marcus also put out a little bit of a threat about a looming dark future if the United States doesn't get into this. Just listen to the clip and then we'll go into it.
If our country fails to act, we could soon see a digital currency controlled by others whose values are dramatically different from ours.
So I found it kind of interesting what he said there at the end about like all of our shared values, as though Facebook has exactly the same values as everyone else in the United States. And obviously there are other countries and people who you would think, okay, obviously we don't want them dealing with the cryptocurrency, but Facebook is not necessarily like this godly presence of like morality and righteousness and the perfect one to do this. And obviously, as you heard in the interview and how Libra and the Libra Association will actually work, is that there are about 20 associates in this organization, reputable companies, pretty trustworthy, and then 100 at large. But Facebook still has the wallet thing and has a little bit of control over this. So take that as you will. Whether or not you think Facebook has the same values as you could be up for question. Those were some of the highlights from the hearings. You can go online and see those and click on some of the links in the show notes for this show. And that is all for today's episode and for the cryptocurrency series. If you missed any of the first two episodes, you can head back to theedgeofideas.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and listen. The first was with Misha Yurchenko on why he is bullish on Bitcoin as an investment. The next was with Kelly Weaver, a PR expert in blockchain and cryptocurrencies, on the role that she plays in PR advocating for these companies and the different use cases that she's found the most interesting. Both great interviews and really informative for me and hopefully for you as well. So I'm going back to school in a couple weeks to USC, where I will be a producer on our radio show at USC Annenberg Media on Thursdays. I'm super excited for that. I will be an all-day gig, and I will be helping make the show at the end of the day that airs at 4. So if you're interested in listening to that and following some more of my work, you can head on over to annenbergmedia.com and Google my name. Do whatever. Things will start popping up when I'm back. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be back soon with more content for you. With that, always remember, listen carefully, think critically, and conclude thoughtfully. I'm Luke Scorzel, and you are listening to Bills.